Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder to a naval semi-guide. And in this I try to talk you briefly through what shell types you want to use regarding what you're ship in and what you're fighting. And that is then basically overcoming some of the confusion that is currently very much widely spread in naval forces due to Gaijin. Now, one of the first things that I want to clarify is that certain things do not work as you might be used to from other game modes, and while there are some basic rules that still in theory are correct, in practice it is better to switch to other ideas. So what I'm talking about is basically the hit camera. As you could see, I hit the ship and it showed me that ship and which module got damaged. It also shows me the buoyancy and the crew percentage, basically the ship health pool. And in a destroyer, as shown here with the USS Moffet, probably one of the best destroyers, you can hit a ship very quickly, very often, and that does not give you the actual status of the enemy ship after a few salvos, because the crew percentage doesn't update as well as the buoyancy. So it can be the case that a ship is about to die, or you get the kill for it, and it still shows you 88% crew and 100% or 96% buoyancy, where it is already on fire and heavily listing. And a little trick is to then either let the hit camera disappear after a while, a few seconds that is, and then you hit the ship again, then it updates, or you quickly switch in a destroyer. This is then practically more practical. You switch to another shell type, hit the enemy again, and then it also forces an update on the stats. With that out of the way, let's talk about what you want to shoot at with what. Let's start with patrol boats, and let's start with machine guns. Therefore, high explosive shells are not that effective, or incendiary rounds, as armor piercing, hitting the internal modules. When you have 20mm, 37 and 40mm and everything in between, then high explosive is pretty effective as long as the enemy patrol boat is not something like a frigate or has armor. If it has armor, you wanna hit the armed compartments, or the armored compartments rather, with armor piercing rounds, and that also can work quite nicely, and the unarmored parts with high explosive. So that is then the way to go. When you are in a frigate, well, there are so many frigates and very busted damage models. I don't want to talk about them, but they can soak up damage like there is no tomorrow, some of them, especially the bots. When you are in destroyers, let's continue with this, then you want to shoot at other destroyers, surprisingly enough, with semi-armor piercing. And you therefore hit the internal modules and you actually penetrate the hull and you do considerable damage. You also can shoot at them with high explosive, but then focus more on the superstructure to knock out the gun turrets, to knock out the torpedo tubes, AA stations, causing fires, knock out the bridge, force the enemy to go in a straight line, etc. And it also very much depends, in my experience, on where the enemy is heading. If it goes bow in towards, if it shows broadside, if it is already engaging you or not. So let's talk about this scenario, because it's very important. If an enemy is engaging you, let's say Moffet versus Moffet, you want to load the high explosive and splash the very big but actually weakly protected gun turrets, so that you reduce the amount of incoming fire. Then you can switch to armor piercing and also farm the crew in the guts of the ship, in the internals, like the machinery, magazines, etc. So there you reduce the incoming fire, also cause already a lot of damage and crew loss, force the repair and the damage con efforts. I made a separate video about this, and you also then can also very easily go for the non-damaged parts of the ship. That also includes an ammo switch, as I just explained earlier. If the enemy ship is engaged by somebody else on your team, then it is up to you. I personally then go for the SAP rounds and go for, as I said, the machinery, as this might be not as easily to hit for your teammates as it might be for you. For example, if there are Japanese destroyers involved, they have no SAP, they have no armor piercing to begin with, and that makes them not really that favorable in a gunfight, especially versus US destroyers, which also have this anti-fragmentation belt. Here you can see the damage of high explosive shells hitting the upper works and how much it costs him crew, knocking out the turrets, etc. Really damn effective. Now, what about when you're fighting cruisers in your destroyer? Again, same rules basically as for the destroyer fight, surprisingly enough. But with cruisers, you can unproportionally cause more damage hitting the gun turrets and the superstructure, as there is more to hit, and you still can try to go for the bow and stern plating with the SAP. Only if it is really broadside to you, then it is preferable to go for the armored citadel with your semi-armor piercing. But that only is for interwar cruisers, not for really well protected light cruisers, and if they are shooting at you, they certainly will have the advantage, because they very often have not just bigger but also considerably more turrets than you. And versus heavy cruisers with a lot of armor protection, yeah, just don't try to anger them, so don't draw their attention, because for them you're just a quick snack. What if you are a cruiser? Let's begin with 5 and 6 inch armed cruisers. You want to shoot at patrol boats and destroyers with high explosive, and versus patrol boats you might outright, hull break them, knock them out, and that is really effective, very often a one-shot. When you're shooting at destroyers, then high explosive is also very effective, again versus the superstructure, but also base use and semi-armor piercing shells versus the hull are highly effective, even more effective than high explosive shells. Armor piercing shells do also obviously go through the hull, but they don't have that much bursting charge, so they are not that effective. Now let's talk about then if you're fighting another cruiser. If you are in a light cruiser and you're fighting another light cruiser, then it depends if the turrets are protected or not. If they are weakly protected, then shoot them up with high explosive. If not, switch to armor piercing, and it depends then on the details if you can actually blow up the ammo rack more reliable or not. When you have to go for the hull, obviously use armor piercing, because you really need all the pen from your guns. When you're shooting at heavy cruisers and even battleships, high explosive again is surprisingly effective, and to be honest, it might be a little bit bugged. Now here is, for example, a example what I do with the Moffet's 5-inch guns and SAP rounds versus a German light cruiser, because it has really light armor, and you can see I knock out the barbettes, I knock out the turrets, and I do a lot of damage firing at the 2 rear turrets. So I'm not really helpless against a light cruiser, except if it might have the jump on me and also loads the right ammo type. And also here the Emden is a perfect practicing ground. So when you are then in a heavy cruiser, still SAP is highly effective versus destroyers, as is high explosive. But high explosive, the damage is not outright that visible, but you cause catastrophic flooding when hitting the hull, and the superstructures, well, you have a very serious splash. But the problem is you don't have the DPM of light cruisers, So that takes you considerably unexpected longer to take down a destroyer or another light cruiser with this sort of armament. Heavy cruisers at the moment have a really bad place in War Thunder. When it comes to heavy cruisers fighting battleships, well, you do not have the DPM to just flood the superstructure with high explosive, nor do you have the armor piercing capabilities to go through the belt armor. There is the case where you can really damage battle cruisers with the best of the 8-inch armor piercing shells, for example the German or the later US ones. But yeah, when you're facing a Fonderton, the coal bunkers eat all the AP, and only the Invincible, I realize the irony, can be taken down with 8-inch cruiser gunfire from modern 8-inch guns. Battleships. Well, it's very simple. Load sap. Nothing but sap. Don't screw around with high explosive. Don't screw around with armor piercing. Load the sap, because you have more than enough pen to go through any of the cruiser armor, and you have such a massive bursting charge. Battleship guns with sap rounds are really powerful in this patch. And even versus other battleships, sap is to be preferred. But it has its limits, and in this update, which just got released, as I might release this video, the Scharnhorst will find its limits. While its AP is still competitive, the SAP really isn't. It's too light, it doesn't have the bursting charge, and so you really feel the difference between even the most modern 11-inch guns and the 13.5 and 14-inch guns of the HMS Marlborough or the IJN Huger, which still will most probably likely be the top hitters of naval forces. And that is basically the TLDR on which shell type to use. One more thing, try it out in a test drive, try it out in a custom battle with your friends. This is where you can really quickly learn what's really going on. And now let's have a look at what I earned in this battle with a 500% civil iron booster with the USS Moffet. Because, come on, load faster. There we go. Yeah, that is 750,000 civil irons. I think it's really worth taking this ship out once in a while. That's it for me today, so thanks for watching, thanks for listening, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, give it it. For you it's just a click, for me it means the world. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more, and as usual we will see each other on the battlefields, in the skies and on the waves of War Thunder.